I'm Josh Allen with PSC Motorsports, and today we're going to be installing a hydraulic pump kit on our 392. Let's get started. This video is created in 3 sections so you can use the vehicle in between sections if needed. First, installing new steering gear. Second, installing pump and cooler. Third, installing the hydraulic cylinder. Simply install removed parts and proceed to the bleeding process. So right here you have your high pressure line, your feed line from your reservoir to your pump, your cooler lines, your cooler bracket, your SRVT, your thermostat housing, your 4 quarts of fluid, your reservoir, your mounting bracket for your reservoir, a belt, and some hardware. So the cylinder assist side of your kit includes your gearbox, your cylinder, your mounting hardware for your stock axle, your cylinder assist lines, your Hines, and your hardware. And that's pretty much it on your cylinder assist kit. Alright, so our first step, we grab our trusty bungee cord. We're going to hook it onto the seat frame underneath. Alright, and we're going to take it, run it up through the steering wheel, back down to the seat frame on the other side, and secure it so that our steering wheel will stay straight when we disconnect the steering shaft from the gearbox so that we don't break any clock springs. Now let's get started under the hood. Now we're going to flop the hood back. Be sure to have some rags ready so that you can flop it all the way back and let it sit against the windshield and not scratch your hood. You got 4 bolts holding the fenders on. One right there, one right here, one right here. So we got one little pigtail right here. She's always a fun one. Oh, that one's really good. So now you got your fender off. Now you can get to your electric pump very, very easily. Alright, so your first step of taking your intake off, loosen up the boot on the throttle body, pull the clips out of the intake boot, undo the wiring harness, flop it back on itself, one 10mm right here. Alright, you zap that guy out. I always just set it up in there. You pull off the breather off there. Now you pull out the intake. So after removing the air box, we're going to remove the high pressure line. The high pressure line is the one closest to the radiator. Then your low pressure line. Your low pressure line is the one closest to the firewall. And you do not need to retain the low pressure line because it gets swapped out for any of our kits, hydraulic, electronic, it doesn't matter because we always put a cooler in line of the system. So now you want to have your drip pan ready. As soon as you pop those lines off, it's going to start leaking everywhere. You also want to take off the cap on an electric reservoir so that it starts draining out and you don't make a big mess everywhere. So you got one pigtail right here and you have 5 10mm, and we're going to remove this little metal bracket so that we can pull the gearbox out of the top and we don't have to drop it out the bottom. So let's get it going on these 10mm. So now you got all your bolts loose. Let's go ahead and pull the wiring loose. There should be one more there.
Alright, so now we got all our wiring off it. Now we can take this and rotate it and get this guy out of the way. So now your airbox bracket's out. Now you have good access to the top of the gearbox and really good access to this 13mm right here from your steering shaft to your gearbox. So we can undo that, and let's get the pitman arm too. We can edit that out. Alright, so with your nut barely on there so it catches it, don't hit you in the face, you're going to hit the pitman arm right about a 45-degree angle from straight. So, boom, drops down. Now, after you get that input shaft, your gearbox is ready to come out. And once again, before you separate this, make sure your steering wheel is secure. Take your bolt out. Should be able to just walk it off, set it down. We're going to take our high pressure line right here and kind of flop it out of the way. Now we have 4 bolts left. We got one there, one there, one there, one there. All right, so what my trick is, I always like to take a ratchet strap, put it right there. Depending on your ratchet strap, you might have to go a little bit further back on the frame, but luckily there's plenty of holes to choose from. We're just going to try to ratchet that back a little bit so that we have clearance to those. Let's grab our impact with our trusty 18mm socket. Let's zap out the inside ones first. Leave all but one. You want to grab this guy and slowly let her eat until she's free. Drop down your tools and let's fish her out. So you grab your 46mm and zap off that nut. So now we got that off. Now let's put it on our new steering gear. Alright, so now you have your pitman arm off your original gearbox. You're about to put it onto, if you have your small bore, it's going to, you're going to reuse your pitman arm. So pitman arm, you want it in the same orientation that it came off, and if you notice, there is one key on here, so it can only go on one way, but you want the pitman arm side, or the side that attaches to the drag link, to go to the front of the box, opposite of the input shaft. Now we're going to put our nut on. Grab our old trusty impact. Put the poop to it. Now we're going to grab our trusty torque wrench. I've already set to the proper spec. That's 220 foot-pounds of torque on there. So let's give it a good old torquing. So now, the gearbox is ready to be installed. So let's go ahead and throw it in the Jeep.
before installation, you just want to make sure your red mark on your gearbox and on your sector shaft are lined up, because it makes everything easier later on down the road. Now we're going to take our gearbox, slip it on in. Our gearbox is in home. So now, let's get some bolts started. So now you got all your bolts started. Now let's impact them down. So now our gearbox is in place. So now we're going to install our SFO2 into our low pressure side. Just like everything else, start it with our fingers. And that guy will be a 3/4. So now we got our 3/4 ratchet. Now let's just go ahead and tighten that down. And you don't want to over tighten it because it is still going into aluminum. So you can pull the threads if you over tighten it. But now that that's there, let's put our low pressure line. So let's go ahead and feed that. But now, let's go ahead and put it onto the SFO2. So now we slide our input shaft onto there. Now let's go ahead, and when you install your bolt, make sure the side that you're installing from has no threads and you're going into threads. We're going to pull out all of our little push pins, right? So there should be 6 push pins. And now we're ready to pull the grill. So grab the top of the grill, peel it a little bit, right? Now you grab the bottom and you just pull. There. Now, if you have a camera on the front, you disconnect the camera. All right, so now we pop off our clips, just like that. So now we have room to get to our 10mm right here. So we undo this guy right here. And so this is our high pressure line right here that we're undoing. And if you're using the electric power steering kit, be sure not to damage this line because you reuse it. Boom. Now we're going to undo the top of the little reservoir. So now we can undo our mounting hardware for our pump, which is 13mm. So we undo those guys so that we can pull this up and start pulling it out, but don't jump the gun yet, because now we need to undo the factory line right here. Boom. And now our electric pump is out. Throw it out. So after you loosen the 18mm on the gearbox side and popped it off the pump side, typically I cut the low pressure hose right here and here, and it makes it coming out a lot easier, because if you don't, you got to loosen up a lot of other stuff to get it out as a one piece. Pain in the butt. Uno. So after you remove the two 10mm bolts, undid it off the gearbox and the electric pump, your high pressure line is ready to come out, and it's just a matter of fishing it out after this point. So our first step, you grab your 3/8 breaker bar, you put it in the tensioner pulley so that we can loosen up the belt, so that we can go ahead and slip the belt off the pulleys. So now that part's done. Now we can go ahead and remove the idler bracket so we can replace that with a pump. So our first step is we remove the wiring harness to the idler so that we can remove the idler. So you get your push tab off, and there should be 3 13mm. One there, one there. And now you've removed the idler, so now we can install our bracket. So our next step is we're going to install the pump bracket. So that goes same bolt holes that your idler was in. Alright, so now you got those started. Let's go ahead and tighten those up. And you don't want to over tighten, but you don't want it to loosen. So now we're going to install the pump. First step is to wiggle it on down there. So the long bolt will go on the top of the pump. So now we're going to install the small bolt into the pump. After tightening the pump up, we're going to install our high pressure adapter into our gearbox. And we will use the little Loctite that comes with the kit. And I like to apply that on every fitting in the system, because it just makes the system seal that much better. So we got our high pressure, so let's go ahead and put our Loctite on our fittings. Let's put a dab on this one, and a little dabarooski on this one. Now let's put our hose on. We'll start a couple threads on the pump. And twist this guy over and start a couple threads on the high pressure side. So now we're going to go ahead and tighten them up. So when you begin to install your reservoir, first step, you need to put your -12 AN fitting on there. Don't forget to use your little Loctite so everything seals nicely. Now that is 1.25 inch size. Now I know with a big wrench you can over tighten it, but you just want to tighten it till it gets almost flush. Has an O-ring, you put Loctite on it, it's not going to leak. Now we're going to put our AN6 on there. That's all the tight. Now we can put our bracket on the back of the reservoir. Now your reservoir is ready to be installed. Before you install your reservoir, we got to loosen our thermostat housing because we need to change out the housing. And the reason we're doing this is because we need to shorten up the hose to have clearance for the new reservoir. Once you've loosened the bolts, you can go ahead and start cracking it loose. Be sure to have your drain pan ready, because you're going to lose some fluid. Alright, so now we're going to loosen up our clamp, get our clamp off. Alright, so now you got everything loose. Let's go ahead and pull off this radiator hose. And now we're ready to put it on the bench, trim it down, and put the new one all together. So now you loosen your clamp up, right? Now you need to get you don't want to damage the hose, but you want to loosen up the hose so that you can get the stock filler neck off, so that we can get it all measured up and ready to trim. So now you got that loose, we can go ahead and fish it on out. Pull back your shrink wrapping a little bit. So we're going to take our tape measure and we're going to go ahead and mark 3 inches. Personally, I like to mark it a couple places around the hose. And now we're ready to trim. So now we've cut off 3 inches with the supplied water neck. We can go ahead and slide that guy on there. So we're about to install the reservoir. We have to loosen these two 13mm bolts right here, take them all the way out to install our reservoir. But before we do that, we have the radiator hose off, modified and ready to go back in, but we have to spin this clamp right here to clearance for the reservoir. So let's go ahead and loosen up our bolts. So you want to pre-cut the hose. You want to get it in place, right? Tighten it up, but before you cinch it down all the way, you want to make sure everything clears with your reservoir. So everything clears. You might have a slight touching on the bottom of the reservoir right there, but other than that, there's no kinks in the hose. Everything looks good, everything flows. So, all right, so now we're going to install our reservoir. So if you have a factory winch, you need to push back the battery cables. There's that bolt. There's that bolt. Now your reservoir is mounted. All right, so now we're ready to install our cooler line. So the 90 goes on the reservoir side, but you're going to slip it right through the same place you slipped the electric kit through. So right there at the bottom. Got to do a rotate and twist. And now let's put the 90 on a reservoir right there. And that's pretty much it. So we're going to go ahead and tighten these down. So after installing your cooler line, we're going to install our feed line to our pump. So right above your transmission cooler lines, in between your cooler, there's a little slot, and you'll just start feeding it through there. But make sure when you do it, you don't pull what I just did. You want the 180 going to the pump. So this is your low pressure, right? So this is your feed for your hydraulic pump. So you'll have it attached right there. It'll go down across the radiator. You want to zip tie it to the radiator shroud. Make sure it's not touching the fan. Make sure all the zip tie tails are cut off. Make sure everything's clean and neat. And then you'll come down, up, and attach this end. Just like that. And that's how it'll be ran. So we're going to tighten up the feed line to our pump right here. Now you're done with that. Let's go ahead and make sure we get the radiator or the feed line zip tied to the radiator shroud. So with those two zip ties secure, and I really prefer to have them secure anywhere that lower hose looks like it's going to get close to a pulley, to make sure it doesn't get close, everything's happy, everything jives. You can spin the fan, nothing's touching, nothing's grinding. Alright, so now we're ready to install our SRVT. So let's go ahead and install the hose half in the top of the reservoir. Alright, so after you got your SRVT hose onto your reservoir cap, we're ready to install our SRVT. We're going to install that in the factory spot. Right there. Make sure she's not touching anything. Then you want to take your hose and you're going to get enough hose to get over to it, have it where you can open your cap, cut it down, and just slide that hose in. So you want to measure before you cut your hose. You're going to go ahead and plug your hose into it, and it's just a push lock fitting. And I like to give it enough room so that you can open your reservoir cap stays there, everything's good. So now you're going to install the belt that came in the kit in the factory routing. Now we're ready to drill our holes for our cooler. So now we need to, if you have a winch, probably going to have to remove it to get clearance to drill your holes. So let's get to it. So now we've removed the winch out of the way. So now we're ready to drill our holes. So we're going to the first hole will be in the second slot, a ½ inch away from the slot, midway, all right? Then we're going to go to the fourth hole, and it's going to be on the inner side towards the driver, and half an inch away from the slot, and that will give us room. So now we're going to start drilling. So now you punch through the first side. Now you're going to start on the back side, and you want to be careful because when you get almost through, you don't want to push all the way through into your AC condenser. Alright, so now we're going to put our cooler together. So let's put our fittings in our cooler. Let's tighten these guys up. Now let's get the brackets ready to mount. So now we got our bracket on there. We're going to tighten it up a little bit, but not all the way. Alright, now we're ready to mount it. So we got our cooler now. Let's install it in our holes that we drilled already. we're going to go ahead and stick our 1/4 inch bolts through the holes. Now let's put our washers on the other side. Our nuts. One side started. Now we got those. Now we can start our line. And I do suggest to put the lines on after you get it started and loose. Now let's get our line from our gearbox on. Make sure we're not touching anything on the radiator or anything like that. Well, let's go ahead and tighten up the cooler bracket, and we're ready to reinstall the winch. So this is our cylinder assist side. So we're about to ready to install it. So we have the cylinder, our hoses, our mounting hardware, and we're about ready to throw it on the Jeep. So let's get it done. Alright, so first start, we're going to pull off the stock stabilizer. And as you see, we're going to have to pull off the stock drag link right here to retrieve that bolt right there. But for right now, we can get the rest of it off. And we're going to zap off the other side of the bracket. So now we got our stock stabilizer out. Now we can put our bracket in. So to retrieve this bolt, you're going to have to drop this one, but to drop that one, you got to drop this one. So it's a 21. So you get this one to come free. Right? So now that you can retrieve that guy out, and you might as well pull this guy out and set her off to the side for now. Now let's go ahead and throw our bracket onto the axle tube and then throw that on there. So when we throw our cylinder on there and start slamming everything back together. So our first step, right? Go ahead and throw these clamps around the tube. Kind of get them in their position. Alright, we'll throw the bracket up there. These two holes right here, use your stock hardware. Kind of get that guy in position there so that you can line up your bolts. Go ahead and throw this guy around there. Now I always throw the head of the bolt going through the bracket to the back side with the nut. Just so if you have any stick out, it's on the back side. And you don't want to tighten anything down until you have all of it together. So you want to make sure you tighten the factory hardware before you tighten those down, so that the factory bracket holds it to the right plane, and now you can tighten your clamps. So now you'll take your bracket, you'll slide it onto the stock or the stock tie rod, slide your bolts in, get them started. Now that guy's started, take your 3/4 wrench and socket. And after those guys are cranked down, you're going to take your 21mm You're going to put your drag link back up in place. Before you put your tie rod. Now that guy's in there. We can loosely sit it in the pitman arm. Right there. Just so it's out of the way for now and won't hit you in the noggin. Alright, so now we're ready to install our cylinder. So we're going to take our bolt, slide her in on in, start the nut on the bottom, and now we're ready to do the other side. So now we got our bolt in. Now we need to drag this in over to the hine and start our bolt on our other side. So let's start getting her over there. And this is easier if you have somebody inside the vehicle turning the steering wheel, where you can just yell at them a little bit more, a little bit less. So now we're going to slide it up into place, and I always like to loosen the caps. Just be careful, because if there's any fluid in there, and if you pull on the rod, it might shoot out. All right, so now we're just going to try to line up this. Now she's in. We just got to start the thread on the bottom side. And this bolt is 15/16 right here. And just start turning away. So now you got that guy ran down. Let's go ahead and snug it up. Let's snug the other side. And now you're ready to put the lines on. So now, if you're non-cylinder assist, you don't need to pull these caps off. But if you're putting cylinder assist on, you need to pull the caps off. So it's 11/16. It's always easier to loosen these caps while the gearbox is out of the vehicle. So that side's loose. So now let's pull the caps off so that we can put our cylinder on. So you put your long line goes to the closest to the input shaft, and your short line on at least these Jeeps go to the one closest to the radiator. All right, so you finger started the line on the gearbox. Now let's do it on the cylinder side, and you always do this before you tighten either line, so that you can make sure the line's nice and happy, and you're not trying to fight the line because you tightened one side before you could start the other side. Okay, so now that side's tight. Now you can tighten your other side. Now let's start the driver's side. So now you get that side finger started. We can put it the other side on the cylinder end. And now that's finger started. You can go ahead and tighten. Your last line. So now we're ready to put our line on. So let's go ahead and finger that guy on there. 11/16 again. Tighten it up. Tighten this guy up. And don't forget to tighten up your jam nuts after you have everything else tightened up. That's it. So, your first step, you got to add some fluid to it. So, I typically like to put about a quart in it at first. And this is where the part where if you have a buddy, it helps, is you can throw your buddy in the driver's seat. And I typically like to jack it up where you have one tire off the ground. That's all you really need, so that it takes resistance off the steering. So that and now you're going to just start working the steering wheel back and forth. So as you're turning the system back and forth, you want to keep adding fluid. And you just want to keep turning it back and forth, because you see air bubbles coming up. That's air leaving your system. So after you've turned the wheels back and forth, and you really stop seeing air bubbles coming up, you are ready to fire up. So let's go ahead and fire it up, buddy. I was going to make a note of when you're turning it back and forth and you see the fluid level rising and lowering about an inch. That is because if you have a cylinder on the front, that's the difference in the cylinder. So the fluid will rise and lower with the cylinder. So midway through bleeding, you want to remove the jack so that you have all the resistance of the tire on the ground on the steering system, so that you can finish out bleeding your power steering system. And you want to keep bleeding until you see no more air bubbles. Right now, I don't see any air bubbles, so we'll turn off the system. And another thing, when you turn off the system, you don't want to see the fluid level rise or lower, because if it rises or lower, you still have air in the system somewhere. So we've noticed that our cylinder is not hitting full stop. So what we're going to do is adjust our cylinder. So what you're going to do to adjust the cylinder, you're going to go ahead and loosen up the bolt holding in the Heim, loosen up the jam nut, and what I typically do is I start with a quarter turn. So turning it the Heim, and I only do it 180 degrees at a time, will add so that you're going to hit your axle stops on your passenger side. Shrinking the Heim will make it where you'll come closer on the driver's side, and that's only for your stock bracketry right here. So we shrunk the Heim. Let's go ahead and put the bolt back in and see if it'll hit stop. So we're going to measure our cylinder right here. So we're going to turn it all the way right here. And we're going to make sure, see right there, hit this axle stop. That side's at full extension. Now let's go back to the driver, the passenger. Right there, it's hitting the the axle stop, so our cylinder is going through the full length of travel. Alright, so now, since we cracked into the coolant system on this guy, we need to fill it back up. So, let's go ahead and dump some coolant in it. We got some coolant in it. So let's go ahead and fire it up. And to do this properly, it's almost like bleeding the power steering system. You need to turn it on, let it do a couple heat cycles so that you can get all the air out of the system. All right, let's fire it up. And what you're going to need to do here is let the vehicle get up to operating temp, so where it's the thermometer about the normal, so that it can heat up, thermostat open up, and it can get all the fluid where it needs to go. So now your vehicle has got up to coolant temp. You can see it all flowing out. We typically want to do this 2 or 3 times to make sure you get your coolant level right. So before you take out your Jeep with these new JLs and Gladiators and all those, you need to turn off the electric power steering from the computer, So there's a lot of different programmers out there to do it. What we use personally are the tasers. You can use HP tuners, all those other guys, it doesn't matter. It does all the same effect. This is what we use though. So let's go ahead and tase it, turn off that electric power steering, and let's go have fun and rip this thing. This is Josh Allen with PSC Motorsports. We just finished up the hydraulic 392 kit. We're out here ripping. Hope to see you on the trails. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for more.
I mean, because like there's.
I don't want to have to redo anything, okay?
I mean, it's like.
Alright.
So now we're going to install our. Today's not happening, Captain. That's just not how the
Hey,
brake
we also
works.
gotta say.
I'm just going to stop talking. I'm going to stop talking to the.
Hey,
job. And you need to do a tongue twister or two, man. You're starting to fumble it.
That's
you
fine.
Fumble and bumble.